Hello, this is my presentation where I'm going to be exploring the question, how far do you agree with Prawer's idea of colonization? I'm exploring this through the theme of colonization and archaeology. I'm going to begin by looking at the definition of colonialism, which is the control over one territory and its people by another, and the ideologies of superiority and racism often associated with such domination. Examples of this in the modern day are the British Empire and the Israel-Palestine conflict, and in medieval times, the Middle East and the Crusades, especially in the Levant area, which we'll be looking at today. Now, Prawer's idea of colonization. He was an Israeli historian and a scholar of the Crusades, specifying in the Middle East. He viewed the Crusaders as colonizers within Middle Eastern society and argued that when they set up settlements in the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, that they didn't assimilate. Prawer said that Crusaders implemented their own legal systems, separate urban living enclaves, imported European social structures, and placed their own rules over local Muslim, Jewish, and Eastern Christian populations, without even attempting to integrate themselves into local indigenous culture. This is what Prawer refers to as a colonial transplant. He believes that there was a segregation between immigrant Franks and the indigenous populations. This separation was believed to be spiritual and colonial. Spiritually, the Crusaders refused to take on the religious traditions, values, and beliefs of the Middle East. They instead served as missionaries and pushed their own form of Christianity onto everyone else. Colonially, they forced a colonial ideological dimension onto the people within the Kingdom of Jerusalem, forcing Western institutions of governance, law, and economy onto the locals. These ideas from Prawer are echoed in the autobiography of Osama ibn Munqid. In a sense, Prawer's view of colonialism translates as a form of early European colonialism, predating and setting a standard for the colonization of America centuries later. This is Alan Blum, and he is also an Israeli historian and scholar of the Crusades. He specialises in the history of the Levant and in the medieval ages. He challenged early readings focusing on castles and fortifications and how understanding them can help us understand the Crusader frontier. He wanted to communicate that even castles and fortresses that were built during this period were serving a meaning of control. The Franks were utilising their fortifications across the Levant for this control. They were doing this to respond to the geography of fear by strategically building strongholds in the high-risk areas. Ellenblum suggests that the building of castles can show us shifts in military pressure and not just symbols of colonisation. The 12th century sees more castles and fortifications being built, which aligns with an increase of military tension. This shows that there was tension between Crusaders and natives and that both sides could feel the pressures of colonisation. However, Ellenblum disagrees with Prawer, arguing that the Franks often settled near Eastern Christian communities and they were integrated in that sense, living together peacefully. This aligns with sources such as Fulcher of Chartres, who believed social solidarity was there amongst coloniser and colonised. However, it's important to criticise this point and understand that interaction doesn't necessarily mean integration, especially when the war is for missionary purposes. But Ellenblum does want us to remember that this period of time wasn't simply colonial, feudalist, or religious. It was much more complex than that and must be understood as nuanced. So these are some primary sources. So William Tyre was a 12th century archbishop and historian of the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. He was an example of the religious justification behind the colonization of the Levant region. He reinforces Prawer's ideas of colonization as he confirms the events of colonization and has a justification behind it. Then there's Fulcher of Chartres, a member of the First Crusade who describes a harmony between Europeans and Muslims in Jerusalem, aligning with Ellenblum's idea of social cohesion between some groups in the Middle East. He uses examples such as intermarriage between religions. We then move on to Osama, who was a Syrian poet, warrior, and diplomat in the 12th century. He experienced crusades. He offers one of the few Muslim eyewitness accounts of life during the Crusades and talks about how Muslims were quite taken aback and shocked by the Franks, describing witnessing barbaric medical practices performed by Frankish doctors, which were things like cutting a man's leg off. This aligns with Prawer's comments about lack of social immersion and reinforces the idea of a colonial transplant. To conclude, I agree a significant amount with Prawer's idea of colonisation. It's clear that when the Crusaders arrived, a majority of them felt superiority over natives in the Middle East. They felt their ways were better and forcefully put these systems in place, resulting in segregation in a lot of cases. Sources like Osama provide important views of oppressed minority groups who didn't have as much of a voice at the time. These sources are more reliable as they are less likely to be painting a victory for the winners. However, I think it's important to remember that in some places there was likely to be instances of social cohesion with different amounts from group to group. It was present even if it wasn't the majority, as we can see from examples such as the Vulture of Chartres, which is why I think it's important to consider that this also was true, whilst Prawer's idea of colonisation also did exist. Thank you for listening.